Hi and welcome to another video, part of this series where we're building an e-commerce website with Django and React. If you'd like to follow along, you'll just need to clone or download the Django React e-commerce GitHub project. The link is in the description of this video. And once you have this, we can get started. What we're going to be doing in this one is adding functionality for us to update addresses on our profile and just fix other things along the way. So we can go and log in. So if we head over into the profile, this is what it looks like right now. We have our billing addresses listed out and a form to create a billing address. Same thing for the shipping address. And what we want to do is basically add a button here that allows us to edit this address. If we click that button, we want to pre-populate this form so that we can edit it and then save it to update that specific address. And we'd also want something to delete this address as well. So we'll just add some buttons at the bottom of this card to help us do that. Then we'll add another item in this menu over here, which is going to be for our transactions. We'll then add a method to fetch all the transactions for this user and then display all that data in its own component here. Then if we head over into our cart, let's just go and add something to the cart. So we'll just add there, select the item, hit add. Then we can navigate to checkout. We're going to want something here to edit the quantity or delete this item. So we're going to work on that as well. So let's head over into the code and we'll get started with editing this cart component here. So we can do that inside the profile. Then if we scroll down, what we can do is add another menu item here, and we'll call this the payment history, and we'll call this one payment history as well, and add it there. Cool. So here in this card group, we are returning a card for every address. Underneath this card content is where we're going to want to add some more properties there. What we can do is also open up react.semanticui.com. We can search for the card component. And then if we scroll down, something like this here. So if we just open that up, here we can see we have card content with the extra property, and then they've got the buttons inside there. So what I'll do is do the same thing here. We can get rid of that div though. And if we take a look at what this looks like, okay, we just need to import the button here at the top. Okay, so we'll just edit those to be update and delete. So let's come back down here. So this one's going to be update and delete, and I'll make this color yellow. Okay, I'll also get rid of the basic there. Cool. So now what we want to do is if I click update, we want this specific address, which we can access because we're mapping through all of them, to be stored in the state so that if we do have an active address that we are selecting to edit, then we want to populate this form with that data. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this form and I'm going to cut it out and bring it up to the top as its own component. So we can just call this the address form. Say it extends React component, give it a render method, and return all of that. Okay. Then we're going to want to move all of the methods and the state properties that correspond to this form logic. So that will just copy all of the state there. And we can get rid of the active item from the state. We can keep error loading. We don't need addresses. We will need countries. We will need form data, saving success, and then user ID we can also pass in from the root components. I'll get rid of that. Okay. So basically that means that we can get rid of all of this except for addresses, and we'll keep the active item as well actually, because it's not in there. All right, now we need to look at what methods need to be moved over. And what we can actually do is store the countries in here as well, because that way we can fetch all of this data when the profile is loaded and not every time the form is loaded. So I'm going to go and cut out countries from there, and we'll keep it inside this component. So all of this will stay. Handle item click will stay. Handle format countries will stay. All of these methods here, fetch user, fetch countries, fetch addresses. What will move to the other component is handle toggle default, handle change, and handle select change, and the handle create address, because that's the actual submit method. So we can cut all of those out, and then we can bring those into this component here. Okay. Then the address form, we're going to bring here in this component. We can get rid of success and saving. And then here underneath, we'll put address form. We're going to want to pass in the countries, which we're getting from the state. So we can pass it in as countries. We'll also pass in the addresses in there as well, because those are the values for that select field for the address. Then what I'll do is I'll copy this error component, and what I'm going to do is bring it into the form here, and we'll say if there's an error, then there's going to be a message that is an error, and we'll also come up top here and say error equals error. So that way, if the form has an error, then the form will have its own unique error displayed, and this error component here, or error message, is if anything of these methods here weren't successful, because they're also setting the state of the error. So that's just to account for both errors in both of those cases. If we take a look here, it says line 88, we don't have any of those values defined, and that's because we need to bring them from here. So we'll just copy that and bring it into this render method. Then we won't need active item, loading, or addresses. So just like that. Then we can also bring success, and we can bring saving. And let's see, 104, we have countries not defined. So countries is not going to be coming from the state anymore. This is going to come from our props. So we'll say countries equals this.props, and we can remove it from here. And cool. So now it's loading exactly the same, except now we can work with this form independently from our main component. And the reason for this is because we want to basically pre-populate this form if it's an update form, or if it's a create form, then we don't want it to be pre-populated. So here we'll add a component didMount method. And the idea is that given the property that we pass into this form, which is either going to be update form or create form, this is going to then pre-populate the form data with that specific address that we pass to it. So what I'm going to do is create two constants here. The one is going to be called update form, and this is just update form. It doesn't really matter. Then the next one is create form. So this is going to be a property that we pass to our address form. So inside here, we're going to grab the form type variable, which is something we're going to pass as a property. And then what we can do is we can say if form type equals to the update form, then we want to set the state, and we're going to set the form data to be the address, which is what we're going to pass in the props as well. So these two, we're going to pass in all the way down here inside this address form, like this. Now, bearing in mind that we only pass the address if we have a selected address. The form type is always going to be passed in, which is either create form or update form. So basically, for the create form, we don't need to pass in an address because we are creating a new address. So we can just leave it like this. However, when we want to update one, then we're going to pass the address form. We're going to specify the form type as update form, and then we're going to pass in the address as the selected address, which is something that we'll do in a second. but we can actually comment this one out because we're still dealing with this first logic here. So the form still shows we have form type as create form, which means back up top here, nothing actually changes in regard to the state being set. We still have the default state over here. But what we will need to change is if we come down here to handle create address, this has a post method. And if we were updating one, we wouldn't be using the post method, we'd be using the put method. So what I'm going to do is call handle submit. It's going to take E. What we can do is cut that logic out and call event.prevent default inside there. Then I'll make this an anonymous function. And the whole point of this is to use the post method. What I'm going to do is copy this and call this one handle update address. It takes in the exact same data. It's going to call axios.put though, not post, because we want to update a specific item, and then the rest remains the same. So basically what we want to do in the handle submit method is check based on the form type that's passed into this component. So we'll check first by grabbing form type, which is going to be equal to this.props. We'll check if form type equals to an update form. Then we want to call this dot handle update address. Otherwise, we want to call this dot handle create address. Then we can bring handle submit as our onSubmit handler, like that. So if we take a look, everything's still working. Now what we can do is handle when each form is actually displayed, which we'll do inside the profile component. What I'm going to do is add another property here, and I'm going to call this the selected address. This is going to be null. And we're going to add a method here, which we'll call handle select address. It's going to take in an address ID, and it's going to set the state where the selected address is the address. And actually we don't need to make it the address ID, we can just make it the address. So then this handle select address is what we're going to call when we actually click that button down here in our card. So when we click the update button, we're going to pass an anonymous function, and it's going to be this dot handle select address, and we're going to pass in A, which is our address. So what we can do is then over here, I'll say console.log address. And if we come take a look and just inspect here, bring this up, and I'll just clear that, click update. You can see these are the properties of the address that we're going to update. So now we just want to make sure that those properties are pre-populated in this form. And the way that we do that is by passing the selected address into the form along with the specific form type. So we have selected address. We can bring that here in the state, come down here. And what we can do is say, if there's a selected address, then we want to render out this component, so this form, and I'll just get rid of all of that. So now, if we have a selected address, the address is being passed into the address form as the object that we just saw now. And that means that if we take a look back here at our component, here in the component didMount method, you can see we're setting the state where the form data is the address that we're passing in. So like that, if we take a look and hit update, we see first of all there's a whole new form which is to update an address. But let's just see what data we're actually getting in the props. If we say console.log address and come back here, then if we hit update, we see line 40, which is this line here in the component didMount method, that we are getting that data coming through. However, so it seems the state is not being set. So what we can do is just inside here, we're going to put an anonymous callback. We can cut this out and say console.log this.state. So if we come back and hit update and check this out, there is our state which has been updated. So we are seeing that there. And the reason for this is because we're not actually passing them back in here as values. So what I'm going to do is grab form data, and we're going to come inside the first input. We're going to set the value equal to form data dot, and this is street address, and then do the same thing for the rest of these. Apartment address, this is going to be country, and this one is going to be zip. And then here, value is form data dot checked. So if we save that, come back here, hit update, and let's see, all of those are good. And this is meant to be default. So if we come back here, hit update, and let's see, our component is uncontrolled. This is most likely this one here. So what I'm going to do is check the property is meant to be checked, not value. Okay, so that error is now gone. If we hit update, there we go. So we see that all of that is being populated. This error is coming from the fact that when we start off with this state, we're setting values inside this object that were not there. So what we need to do is, if we just come back and open up form data and just copy all of those, then we can open this up and paste all of that there. So what we want is to set default as false, and we want to set everything as an empty string. So like this. And once we've done this, that means that our data at least has some initial properties. So now if we hit update, now we don't get that error because we're not changing values that were not controlled. So everything was controlled. And like this, what we want is to have an update method on the other side, which is then going to be receiving a put method when we click the save button. So what we can do is just close that, come into core, we'll go into API views, and here we'll just scroll down, copy the address create view, and just rename this to be address update view, which is then going to use the update API view. I'm just going to import these over multiple lines. So we need update API view, and we also need the destroy API view while we're at it. Then we can take that method and make this inherit from that and keep everything the same. Then we can bring address update view into our URLs. So we'll just import it here. And then what we can do is create another path. This is going to take in a primary key to identify the specific address we want to update. And then we can put /update at the end of that. Then use address update view and give it a name as address update. So that's working. Now we can make sure that we actually submit that put request. If we just come down to that method, we want to now create the address update URL. So we can do that and just close those off. And we can come into constants. We'll call this one address update URL, which is going to take in an ID and go to /update of that specific instance. So that means this needs to take ID as a parameter. So address update URL we can import at the top of our file here. And then if we come down into that handle update address, this is going to be address update URL, and it's going to take in the ID of this specific address, which we can access from the form data. So that's just going to be form data.id. So like this, we can now test this out. If we hit update, add 555 at the end of that, hit save. Let's see, we're getting a 400 error. So if we just scroll down, it says here user, this field is required. And let's see user ID, which says to be coming from the state, which it doesn't have in the state. So we want to pass the user ID from the props, not from the state. So we'll just call user ID equals this dot props, copy that and do the same thing over here. and make sure we don't include it from the state. Okay, so that means user ID needs to come from this profile component, which we do have in its state over here. And we can pass that down into the address form. So we can say user ID equals user ID and pass it in there, and just make sure that we're grabbing it here in the render method. So user ID. Okay, so we come back here and let's go back to the console, go there, click update, put 555, hit save. Your address was saved. So now if we refresh the page, and it seems it's converted that into a shipping address. So let's hit update, get rid of 2 there, hit save again. And if we come back, just refresh this, it seems it's still saving that as a shipping address. So active item is also important. We need to make sure that we pass this into the address form as well. So I'm going to pass it in here as active item, just like that. Then in the address form, come all the way back up here. We're going to be receiving it as a property, and we can get rid of that console log there. So down here in handle create address, active item comes from the state, which it doesn't get from the state there. We also will get that from the props. So we can do it like that, and then do it like this. Remove active item from there. Cool, so now we're getting the correct things from the props. So if we try this again, and what I'm going to do is just go into the admin and move that other one back over. So we'll just go to addresses, and this one I'm going to change to a billing address. Just hit save there, refresh this. So there it is. If I hit update and we add 555, hit save, and we can go to shipping addresses, go to billing address, and we see that it is updated. What we can also do is we can add a callback method. So here when we set the state, we can say this .props.callback, copy that and do it here as well. So callback is going to be a property we add in this component here as well. Callback will say equals this dot handle fetch addresses, or actually we can add handle callback instead, and we'll deal with it there and make sure that we don't instantiate it. So like that. Then we can create this method here. So handle callback, an anonymous function. We want to fetch the addresses because we've now created a new one, but we also want to set the state for the selected address to be null again. So we'll say this dot set state, selected address is null. So if we come back here, hit update, put something else there, hit save. That way, at least when we hit update, it's giving us that feel that we have updated it, and it's fetching the data again to show us that it has been updated. So like this, we're now able to update our addresses. So like this, we're now able to successfully update our addresses. To delete an address, we can simply just go into our core API views. We'll add a view here that inherits from the destroy API view and call this the address delete view. This won't take a serializer. We can bring this into our URLs, and we can basically copy the update view, and we'll just call this delete, and it's going to use the address delete view. Then we can go back into the constants, copy this one. We'll call this the delete URL, which will go to /delete. We can bring that into the profile. So if we come here, import it there, we can then add a method here underneath one of these methods here in the profile. So we could bring it here and say handle delete address. It's going to take in an address, and then we can basically copy all of that and we can say it's going to send a delete request to the delete URL. So address delete URL. It needs to take in an ID, which is going to come from that address that we pass it. Or we could actually just pass it the ID from the beginning. So address ID. Then here we can just call this.callback. We can bring the handle delete address method over here into our card. So when we click the delete button, we'll call this.handle delete address of a.id. So that means this needs to be an anonymous function. So if we test this out and hit delete, let's see if we come back here, it does delete it. It just gives us an error. So what we'll need to do is just check the method, this handle delete address, and just make sure that everything makes sense. First, we call address delete URL, passing in the address ID, and we are passing in a.id, so that's correct. We use auth axios. Once we get a response, we call this.callback, and it's meant to be this.handle callback. That's where that error was coming in. So now, let's come back here. We're going to need to log in. This brings up the fact that if we're on /profile, we want it to actually redirect us to the login page if we're not authenticated. So what we can do is we can come here to the render method, and right here, we want to check if we are authenticated. The way that we can do this is by getting it from our store. So if we come all the way down to the bottom, we don't have any connect method being used yet. So we'll come here to the top. We can say import from React Redux, and this is going to be connect. Then we can come all the way down here. We're going to say constant map state to props, and it's going to take in state. It's going to return us an object, and over here we're going to have is authenticated, which is going to come from state.auth.token not equal to null. So if it's not null, then we get true. Then we can connect this up to our profile component and just pass in map state to props. And is authenticated, we can then use here at the top of the render method. So we can say constant is authenticated equals this dot props. We can then say if not authenticated, then we're going to return a redirect to another component, and we'll use this from the React router DOM package. So this is the redirect component. Then over here, just come down to the render method, we'll return a redirect, and this is going to take the to property, which is going to be /login. If we save that and come back here, you can see that it has redirected us to the login page. So now we can go and log in. Let's go and add in a dummy address. So we'll just say like this, and we'll say the country, zip code, make it the default address, hit save, and there we go, there we have it. Now we're also going to want this form to actually be unpopulated again. So what I'm going to do is just come back here. We'll go back into this form, and here when we call handle submit, once we call handle update address, which does the callback, here we have the set state above that. So in that set state method for both of these handle update or handle create address methods, we're going to come in there. We're going to set the form data to be an empty dictionary, and default will be false. So now if we hit update, what I'm also going to do is make sure that we can only see one form at a time. So how we can do that is if we just come back in here, we have the selected address, which is what we're using to render out the form in the first place. So what I'll do is here, I'll say selected address equals to null. Then we'll do this address form. Otherwise, I'll just put null. So that way, if we come back here and we hit update, then we have this form being populated, and we don't have two forms showing up at once. So let's try and change this, and we'll say this is now street. Hit save. So now if we try and delete this, then we can see that it was deleted successfully. And if you try and refresh the page, it's not coming back. So it is updating and deleting those addresses correctly. And so that's where we're going to leave this one. If you've enjoyed it, leave a comment down below and let us know what you think. And otherwise, thanks for watching. Don't forget to subscribe, and we'll see you in the next one.